by the shroud on my right, trying to look at it, and take it all in. And then you get to the center aisle coming in. It was up by the altar. They had a big drapery that came down, and the shroud was there. And take a left-hand turn and go out the center aisle, we were told. So I get there and I take the left-hand turn, and right there in the second row, a man on the aisle, a man gets up and leaves. I'm thinking, well, these must be special people. They have seats right up front. I figure, what do I have to? I learned this from my father. Take advantage of what you can. I sat down in the seat. I said, the worst thing that can happen is they tap me on the shoulder and say, get out of that seat. That's not your seat. Nobody said a word. I could have stayed there all day. If I couldn't, because I had a train ticket to go back. But I spent somewhere between half hour and an hour there looking at the shroud, and I became emotionally involved. When I looked at, here I am, a surgeon. I'm looking at the body and face of Christ. The face is all bruised, but the blood all over the body from somewhere around 400, 500 wounds from the lashing, and the blood on the wrist and the feet. Tears start coming down my eyes. That was a huge thing.
Demonic cars, miraculous healings, near-death experiences, miraculous, literally 1 in a million chance lottery of victories. This show, guys, this week, my guest, Dr. John Sottosanti, has the absolute most insane conversion story you will ever hear. An intellectual, an academic, a surgeon who is converted to Christ in the most profound ways, again and again and again, with miracle after miracle. I mentioned a few of them. There's actually a million more of these that bring John to a point of absolute surrender, that's his word, to Christ. Guys, this week on the show, you do not want to sleep on this one. I have never heard a more insane conversion story than this one, guys. You're going to love it. Please watch and enjoy. Sottosanti is the last name?
Sottosanti is just fine.
All right.
Under the saints, that means, by the way. Did you know that?
That's incredible. I did not.
Yeah, Soto is under. Santi is the plural of saints, so it's under the saints.
You were destined to be an incredible. You had that blessing from the beginning. That's amazing.
I didn't know that.
Oh wow. All right, friends, welcome back to the show. I'm so pleased you're joining us this week. I am joined for an incredible story. I'm joined by Dr. John Sottosanti. He performed oral surgery in San Diego, California, was an associate professor in the Department of Periodontics at the University of Southern California, the author of many articles in peer-reviewed scientific journals, and invented products and techniques for bone growth that he taught worldwide. He's a former president of the California Society of Periodontists and the San Diego chapter of Legatus, an international organization of business leaders united in Christ. He's the author, for our purposes here today, of Mortal Adhesions. A surgeon battles the 7 deadly sins to find faith, happiness, and inner peace. John, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here, and hello.
Keith, thank you so much. I'm so pleased to be on your show.
I'm thrilled to have you, and I gotta say, this is not the case for all the guests, okay? I'm not trying to flatter you, but I gotta say, I was chatting with a colleague today at work, and I mentioned I brought your book in, and I was looking through it, and I showed him, and he said, man, you get the coolest guests on this show with the craziest stories. And I said, I do. I'm grateful to have guests on like yourself, John, with these absolutely engaging and interesting stories. A surgeon who battles the seven deadly sins, who in recent times is in deep work with the Shroud of Turin, who's doing some fascinating things, who has all these amazing pieces to your conversion story, John. It's awesome. So I'm really thrilled to have you on the show with such a cool conversion story. I wonder, before we get into it, you reached out to me because we had a colleague of yours, I think, on the show, or someone that you know in work on the Shroud. I think is where you first met this gentleman previously. What's your connection? Tell the listeners a little bit about why you first emailed me, because I think this is a really cool connection with how we got in touch.
Well, I'll talk a little bit about the Shroud as we go along in my story, but just very recently, I went to an international Shroud conference in St. Louis, Missouri. And at this conference were the big names in the whole Shroud arena. And one of them was Dr. Gil Lavoie. So I was so impressed talking to Dr. Lavoie and his wife, Bonnie, that I looked him up on the internet. And all of a sudden, I came across his performance on the with you. So Keith, and you did such a nice job with him, and he's such a knowledgeable man. And I thought, wow, I'd love to be on that show. And I had no idea whether or not that would ever happen. So with the advent of AI, I just went to AI and said, how can I contact Keith? And got the email address, and you were so nice to answer back.
That's fantastic. You thought Dr. Lavoie did this. I will subject myself also to the rigor, to the the treatment that he received on the Cordial Catholic. You were willing to be subjected to that that level of scrutiny. I think that's awesome, John. That's great, and I was thrilled. It's really cool. And yeah, you mentioned the Shroud figures into your story, and we'll get to that idea, that part of it, because I think it's really fascinating how you met him through the Shroud. You came to me through the Shroud, through him. This is all these things. I love how the Holy Spirit orchestrates these awesome encounters all along the way. So with that said, John, I want to get out of the way. You can take us back as far back as you want to go, and kind of tell us how your journey unfolded from whatever point you want to go forward until our encounter, I guess.
Well, I'm actually going to start at my birth, and I will skip many years, Keith, so don't worry, we won't be here all night. But I was in my 50s when my dad was going through a traumatic experience. My mom and dad got divorced after 52 years of marriage, if you can imagine.
Wow, yeah.
She claimed that he drank too much. He always drank the same amount, 2 beers every day, but she said she had enough. So he was very upset about that. And he said, John, I want to tell you something I've never told you. He said, when you were born, he said, the doctor came out into the reception room. He had blood on his gloves, and he called my name, and I went up, and he said, sir, I'm sorry to tell you this, but I can only save one of them, either save your wife or save the baby. So you're going to have to pick which one I'm going to save. And he said, John, I'm really sorry to tell you this. He said, but I picked your mother. He said, I knew her, but I didn't know you. And now she's divorcing me. And obviously I'm here, and my mother, as you can tell if you read my book, lived a long, beautiful life. And so that worked out well. So that was the first miracle, that I'm even here.
Wow.
But our family was somewhat dysfunctional in that mom was very religious, born into a Catholic family, and her mom and dad went to church every Sunday. Dad was born into an Italian family in Sicily. And when he came here, he felt that there were a lot of prejudices against the immigrants. And so therefore, he wanted his kids to have a better life. Although he did fine. He got scholarships and went to college. But he said, I want you 2 children. I had a sister. He said, I want you to become doctors. If you become a doctor, he said, you'll have a lot of respect, and you also make a lot of money. And that was really big because they didn't have very much money. And so that was really important to make a lot of money. So I followed Dad more than I did Mom. Mom was always praying, and Dad wasn't at all. He would go to church just because Mom wanted him to, but he would always be staring at the ceilings because he was a civil engineer, and he was counting the bricks and how much it would cost to build this thing. And I knew that about Dad, and all I remembered was he said, get an education and make a lot of money. And that just stuck into my brain. And I didn't seem to need God. I mean, I automatically went to catechism and had my first communion and went through confirmation, but it didn't mean anything to me. I didn't pay any attention when the nuns were teaching us. And so my mom said I had to go to confession once a year, and I did that. But once I got off to college, that was the end of it. The one interesting thing is, which really turned out to help me, I'll even call it a mini miracle. We'll just talk about miracles themselves. What are they and how often do they happen? There's little miracles and there's big miracles, and I would call this one a little miracle. But my senior year in high school, I fell in love for the first time to a really nice Irish Catholic girl. And I went to an Ivy League college, got involved in fraternity life, and she saw the kind of life that I was leading and realized that I wasn't for her. But she came out to a weekend and saw too much fraternity parties and sent me a Dear John letter freshman year right before finals. And I am a procrastinator. I had half the calculus book to read. I'm at the University of Pennsylvania, an Ivy League school, and I didn't want to flunk out. And I hadn't read a lot of the other courses either, material. And I had so much work to do in an 8-day study period that they had given us. But once I got that Dear John letter, I was absolutely crushed. I immediately went into depression and shrunk. I couldn't study. I went to study hall. And all I remember is, when I first got to college, Mom said, you better go check out the Newman Center. And I found that the Newman Center was a Catholic club affiliated with the church. And I went over there in a little chapel, and I guess I attended a social event, never went back. But when I realized that I was going to flunk out of college, I couldn't think of anything else. And I thought, I better go over to that church and say some prayers. So I go into the church. And, it's just something I hadn't been accustomed to since I basically left for college, and sat there and started praying the only 3 prayers I knew, the Our Father, the Hail Mary, and the Act of Contrition. And I said them over and over and over again. And 1 hour passed, and I'm still feeling miserable. And somewhere around the second hour, something happened. It was so dramatic. It was the Holy Spirit. It had to be. I didn't even know much about the Eucharist, but there was a little light up there on the altar, and I presume the Eucharist was there. But all of a sudden, I got this feeling of calmness and peace, and my mind cleared up instantaneously. And I just walked over to the study hall, started studying, did it right through the 7 or 8 days that I had to do it, and passed the exams. And I couldn't believe it, because I didn't even know anything about meditation at that point in time. Later on, I actually found out about it, which maybe we'll have time to talk about. But it was a miracle. I mean, it was just amazing how it worked. It didn't last forever, in that after a couple of weeks, some of the anxiety worked itself back in. But it was so dramatic. So then I went on and finished college, answered Dad's dream of becoming a doctor. Went to Georgetown University for that, went into the military for 3-4 years, and then went to graduate school in Los Angeles. And so I remembered, again, what Dad said. I mean, I had the degree and I set up a practice, but that wasn't enough just to see patients. I wanted to build a big office, and I brought in other doctors. And I actually, by the time I was 40, I had like 35 people working under me. And it was a big business. I was able to buy a big house overlooking the ocean in San Diego, California. I had movie stars that came down from LA. One of my patients was Francis Crick, the discoverer of the DNA molecule, which is I don't know if you've got a chance to read that chapter, Keith, but he was a real devout atheist. And that's the first time the Shroud of Turin came up, because, we scientists, and I am a scientist, a lot of times we want to see proof. Somebody says, well, God exists. Well, okay, well, prove it to me. And I remember when I'm talking to Francis Crick, and he was telling me that God didn't exist, and the Bible was a bunch of fairy tales. He said, so I asked him to give me an example. He says, well, take, for instance, Christ walking on water. You can't walk on water. That's scientifically impossible. I mean, he had no ability to understand faith and the supernatural. And even, it's just an amazing experience. And one of the first things that happened in terms of me really wondering if miracles truly did happen. It had to do with my dad. I came home. I had just finished the military career when I was going into my residency for surgery. And I walked in the house. And remember, Dad was not a believer. So I look out the dining room window. In our backyard, there's this gorgeous stone. I'd call it it would look like a miniature Lourdes or something, big stone edifice with a circulating pumping water and the Virgin Mary, beautiful statue. And I'm like, Dad, what happened? That's not you. You built that? That must have cost a lot of money. What's going on here? Yeah. He said, oh yeah, you got to hear my story. Okay, so I'll try to. This story could take up a whole hour, but it won't. 5 minutes is all you can give me. And so he says, I had his friend Andy Brose, and Andy Brose went to mass every day. Why he went to mass every day? Well, he had terrible asthma when he was a kid, so his mother took him to a shrine in Canada, Saint Ando de Beaupré in Quebec, Canada, and he prayed that if Mother Mary would heal his, or God, Christ heal his through the intercession of Mother Mary, would heal his terrible asthma, because his mother was told he wouldn't live to age 21. He would go to mass every day for the rest of his life. And the next morning, after praying all day, his asthma was gone. Doctors couldn't believe it when he got home. So anyway, my mother and father were visiting Annie and Adeline's house. And on the way home, it was about a 30-minute drive, Mom starts berating on Dad. You drink too much, and you told some off-color stories. Why can't you be like Andy? He goes to mass every day. He's a holy man. He's a wonderful man. I'm embarrassed to be with you. That's the way their marriage was. And sometimes Dad definitely deserved it. So Dad goes home, and he's lying in bed, and for the first time in his life decides to pray. Remember, he wasn't at all religious. And because Andy had talked about Mary, he said, Mother Mary, he said, I can understand why Andy goes to mass every day. And a miracle happened. In fact, he had a second miracle happen, and that he told Dad about it. And if I had one miracle happen to me, I would go to mass every day for the rest of my life. Well, it turned out that Andy, one of the things that the second miracle that happened to Andy is Andy's wife was pregnant, and he was a carpenter working in Connecticut with the cold winters. They didn't work that much. Didn't have any money to pay the hospital bill because she was pregnant. And he just prayed to God that something would happen, that he would be able to have the money to pay. So in Connecticut at that point in time, there was something called the numbers racket. It's kind of like the lottery that we have today. And it was illegal. And it was run by the Italian mafia, the Jewish mafia, all the mafias that were out there. And you had to pick a number from 1 to 1,000. Andy prayed the rosary every day besides going to mass. And he knew that in the rosary were 6 Our Fathers and 53 Hail Marys. So when I call him a bookie, it's actually called a runner, asked Andy what number he wanted, Andy said, put $1 on 653. And would you believe the odds are 1 in 1,000? The next morning, it shows up. It's the last 3 numbers in the Treasury department of how much money the United States Treasury has, and it appears in the New York Times and a lot of other papers. And the number ended in 653, and he wins $1,000. So he told my father that. Okay, so my father's asking Mother Mary for a miracle so he could become a believer. Every day in the office, he would make a phone call, or actually the phone call would come in from the job sites. It was a construction company. He was civil engineer, and the construction superintendents couldn't interpret the plans. So a guy by the name of Tony calls him, and they have their conversation about the building. And then he's about to hang up, and he says, John, I got a question to ask you. He said, you want to play the numbers today? And I'm standing there not believing what I'm hearing. And guy says, yeah. My father says, yeah, I want to play the numbers. What number you want? I want number 653. Put $2 on 653. My father says, yeah. Andy says, $2. He says, that's a lot of money. Remember, gas was like 20 cents a gallon back then. He says, that's a lot of money. If you like number 653, I don't know where you got it from. He said, put a number for it to win today, and put a number tomorrow, put a number for it to win the next day. Then you double your odds. So my father said, great. Sounds like a good idea. The very next morning, he gets a phone call from this guy, Tony.
No.
John, where'd you get that number? He said, you hit. and so my mother, all this money came in, and my mother said, John, God made that happen, and Mother Mary made that happen. He said, you're not going to spend that money on yourself. You are going to build a shrine to Mother Mary. He said, that's why the shrine's in the backyard. But we went out to dinner, and I look at my dad's license plate, and it was JMJ 653. Jesus, Mary, Joseph, the number 653. 6 Our Fathers, 53 Hail Marys, and 1 Rosary. So to me, a scientist, I'm thinking, what a coincidence. But when you really figure it out, the odds for Andy to win the first time he played were 1 in 1,000. He tells my father plays the first time, the odds are 1 in 1,000. You put those together, the odds that my father would win that day were 1 in 1,000,000. Unbelievable, isn't it? And I thought, that's an amazing coincidence. So I began thinking that maybe there's something there, but not really. Again, and I went off to college and totally forgot about all those kinds of things, except for the one day in the Newman Center. So life went on, and I was doing great. In my 40s, I had this big business and everything else. And then things started happening, as it always will. No one's going to get through life without sorrows. And things happened. A lot of them business related. I had an employee embezzle a lot of money, paid a contractor hundreds of thousands of dollars many years ago to build out a big building, paid in full at the end of the completion of the building. And 2 weeks later, we started getting what are known as lien notices from the city that the contractor evidently had not paid the subcontractors, basically ran off with our money without paying anybody. And we had to repay, which I didn't have the money to do. So put us in a big giant hole. It was a miserable time, along with the embezzlement. And all of a sudden, money became somewhat of a problem. And I had, associates in the office, and we had staff problems. And I started getting headaches, neck aches, and I had been playing golf, not golf so much as tennis. And I couldn't do anything. I was a physical wreck at 45, 50 years old. And one night, I'm in my car, in my oceanside house, basically, and I'm looking up at the stars, not really believing in God at all, but I didn't know what else to do, just like that time when I got the Dear John letter. So I looked up at the sky and I said, God, if you are up there, all I want is inner peace. And nothing major happened that night, but the very next day, I go to the bookstore because I was looking for a book on tape because I was having a business meeting out in Palm Springs, 2 or 3 hour drive from where I lived. And I wanted to listen to a book on tape. So I was thinking of a novel or something. And out of clear blue comes a book that had nothing to do, with fiction or anything like that I expected to buy. But it had to do with love and peace. So I bought it. And it started changing my life. I introduced it to my partner, and it started changing his life. And we started getting along for the first time in many years. And not only that, but that led to another book that I ended up getting within a few weeks. And the publisher of that book was the Foundation for Inner Peace. What did I ask for in the car? All I want is inner peace. So I get involved with reading other books by this author, and I really wanted to meet him. About 2 months go by, I read 4 of his books. I'm taking one of my sons to Stanford University to check it out. He was a senior in high school, and I never get to airports early. And we got there early, and I hear a voice. And the voice was the same voice that I was hearing in my car, listening to these audiobooks. It was, and the guy's first name was Jerry. And I thought, no, it couldn't be him, but it sounded like him. So he starts walking away. And I say, Jerry? he turns around and looks at me and said, "Oh, there you are. I've been looking for you." And I said, "No, not me. He didn't know I was there. He's looking for his ride." And it turned out his ride didn't come, so he had plenty of time to talk to me. And I had a half hour before I had to get on their plane. And we had struck up a friendship. He brought me to his organization to take a free seminar with my wife. It's a fantastic time. Taught me spiritual principles. I weren't Catholic by any means. But anyway, it was just an amazing experience how something could happen really just like that.
Yeah.
And besides, so I'm beginning to think that maybe there is something to this God thing, and that I didn't know if there were angels or, anything else out there. I wasn't sure really about God, but I said, if there is, the holy aspect of what's going on, the other side of the coin is the devil. And I didn't really believe in either very much. But when I moved into this fancy community, I was driving an old beat up Chevy, didn't want my patients to see it. So I went down to the Mercedes-Benz dealership and I asked them if they had an almost new Mercedes that would look new. And they said, "Funny you asked that, because what just came in is a black Mercedes with a gray interior," which is what I said I wanted. Kind of almost a stretch type of car. And he said, only has 5,000 miles on it. So I got it, especially because I was running a meeting for the University of Southern California, and we were bringing in internationally known speakers, and I was the chair of the program, and I had to have a dinner planned on the night between the 2-day meetings, and something weird happened. The valet pulled up my car. My wife got in it. 2 speakers got in the back seat. And then another car pulls up, and man gets into it who I knew was the head of the department. And he gets in it, and within 5 seconds, his car sounds like it gets revved in neutral, gets shifted into first, and slams into my back of my car, pushes it out into a busy street, ricocheting it off of all kinds of Ferraris and Lamborghinis, because this is Beverly Hills where we were for this thing. It was unbelievable. But that was, quote, accident number 1. I didn't think anything about it. 4 weeks later, I go to, I know the date. It was February 13th because it was Valentine's Day the next day. And I buy my wife, an expensive necklace or something like that before I had a meeting with my partner. So I go to the restaurant, and the bag is sitting in the front seat. So I figured I don't want to bring that in. So I'll park right in front of the restaurant, and that way I kind of maybe keep an eye on it, whatever. I wasn't in that restaurant 30 minutes before a policeman came in and said, "Anybody own a black Mercedes sitting out front?" So I go out with him, and he said, "I'm sorry to tell you this, sir, but somebody took a big rock and threw it through your back window." And I looked, the back window's broken out, and there is the rock. And he says, "They take anything?" So of course I thought they did, but I looked in the front seat, and the jewelry bag is still there, untouched. Well, that's weird, but things happen. Okay, 4 weeks later, I'm in the car with my wife in a really busy intersection where I can't move front or back, long line of cars. And coming around the corner is a beat up old car, and its front wheel breaks off from the car and starts bouncing towards me as I'm backing away. It hits the door, creases it, breaks the window, and goes over the roof. And then the light turns green, and these cars behind me have been waiting for 10 or 15 minutes. I felt I had to move, so I moved and figure I'll make a U-turn and come back, which took a while. Come back, and there's no car there. And I'm thinking, how far could he get? So I go around the back, and there's the beat up old car, and the guy was ripped clothes, and he said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'll fix it. I'll fix it, or I'll pay for it." And I told him, forget it. I said, he was missing teeth, and it was just a sad situation. Okay, that's the third thing. Then a month later, it was 7:30 in the morning. I'm driving to my second office 30 miles away. And it was a green light, so speed limit was 50. Over the next block or two, I go up to speed limit. And a woman who had been parked at a red light facing towards me still had a red arrow, but the lights to the right of the red arrow turned green, and her mind said, "Green, step on the gas." I'm doing 50. She's doing 20, hits me head on, which is like hitting a stone wall at 70. And I was taken to the hospital. The car was wrecked, and the insurance company wanted to fix it. And my wife said, my wife's not superstitious. She said, "You're not getting in that car." So I go ahead and make a deal with the insurance company. They're going to pay for my neck and everything else. And also I said I want part of the deal. I wanted enough money to buy a brand new car of the same model and everything else, which they did. So I got a brand new car out of it. Never had another problem with it. But 2 months later, I'm working in my office. The phone rings.
No.
And an attorney is on the phone, and he says, "Is this John Sottosanti?" And I said, "Yes." He says, "Your car." Now, remember, I'd given a car to the insurance company 2 months earlier. He said, "Your car, black Mercedes with license plate," he reads off what my old license plate was just involved in a major hit and run accident in an intersection in Los Angeles. And and it hit a pickup truck, demolished the pickup truck, went through a gas station, bounced it, hit the pumps, got slowed down enough for somebody to get the license plate number, and disappeared. And then I told them it wasn't my car, and I never saw the car again, and I don't know what happened.
Oh my gosh.
That car was demonically possessed.
Yes.
There's absolutely no doubt about it.
No.
It had to be. It absolutely had to be. For our listeners out there, if you want to know a very interesting story, there was an actor by the name of James Dean that died prematurely. And an amazing story. Alec Guinness, who was a British actor, was in Beverly Hills trying to get into a restaurant but didn't have a reservation. And he meets James Dean. So he has two famous people right out there in front. And along with that is a brand new car with a bow on it. And that was a car called it was a fancy car called the Spider with a bow on it. And it had never been driven by James Dean. And Alec Guinness looks at James Dean and he looks at the car and he says, "I just got this feeling. Don't get in that car." He says, "If you get in that car and drive this car, within 7 days, you'll be dead." 7 days later, James Dean died in that car. So if you go to the internet tonight or tomorrow and look up James Dean, Alec Guinness interview, and you'll see the most fascinating interview. And the parts of that car, because the car was so expensive, went off to 3 or 4 different people. All those people who got parts from that car all had major accidents. So I began thinking that maybe the devil, maybe evil, and maybe there is a supernatural world out there. And so in some ways that was part of my believing, that God maybe does exist, because the devil exists, and I pretty sure that God exists too. So I'd have to call myself pretty much not an atheist. I'd call myself like an agnostic. So I started doing searching, and I went to a New Age church, and I thought that was kind of cool. I listened to some of the New Age gurus, and New Age still exists today. It's not called New Age anymore, but a lot of the stuff that you're going to hear from people on that involves tuning into the energy of the universe and all that kind of stuff that people say and hear and do, it was all available. It was all out there 30 to 40 years ago. And that worked for a while, but then it didn't. So I went over to the Deepak Chopra Center to learn about transcendental meditation. So I became a student, not of Deepak himself, but of his clinic, and learned how to do meditation with sitting on a floor, shoes off, other people in the room, cross-legged, palms up, and saying the mantra over and over and over and over again until I'd feel peace. And that peace would last a couple of hours. So you had to do it in the morning maybe, and then in the evening, and you had to do it every day. But God wasn't part of it. It was just a repetitious type of thing. And then I realized that wasn't the answer either. So I was kind of bouncing around all over the place. And the dad came down with a terminal illness where he got very bad pneumonia and got a septicemia and was definitely going to die within a day or two. And the doctor called me at home and said, John, I don't know what's happened. He said, but get over here right away. He said, your dad just woke up and he seems normal. He says he hasn't been out of intensive care. He's been in almost a coma for a month. He hasn't moved. He says, but he wants to get out of bed. He says, that's so unusual. He says, this may just be a short thing. So if you can get over here to see him, or I know he's divorced, but his wife will come over, that would be great. So I called my mother and she came over to the hospital room, and we're in the reception room, and Dad came out. I mean, this is like coming out from the dead, because he'd been in bed in this coma state for a month. And he sees my mother and he gets out of his wheelchair, makes the steps across the room, hugs and kisses her, and she does the same. And they both are tearing and crying. And this is after the divorce, which they hadn't spoken for a year or two and were angry at each other. And they had this unbelievable healing. So I was thinking, well, I wonder if God's involved in that. And then years go by, and my mom comes down with lung cancer, terminal lung cancer. So my wife and I took her in for her last year, and fortunately, someone had given me this bottle of water from a place called Lourdes, France, and I didn't know much about it, but it was supposed to be healing water. So every night when she went to bed, I would say the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit on her forehead. Now, I was in California, as I told you, but they moved out and they brought the statue with them. So the statue of Mary made it 3,000 miles. They left my Mickey Mantle rookie card, which is now would have been worth $1 million home, but they brought Mary out. So that was an interesting thing. So Mom is in her room in our house, and we have the statue of Mary outside of her window so she could see that. And every night I'm saying the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, Amen. And so she goes on Friday morning, she goes into this deep coma. I mean, it was unbelievably deep. So deep that I could pinch her face and yell into her ear. She never moved. But she had like this peaceful look on her face and almost a smile. And so we had hospice involved, and they said, when it's time, your mother will just die. And there's not too much we can do. It's lung cancer and it's spread. And so I thought, well, she's alive and she's comfortable, so I'd call the priest. So I called the priest, and he came over, and he gave her what we called then the last rites. And then he came and had dinner with us. And he said, he had an Irish brogue. And he said, John, he says, your mom, he said, it was amazing. The look on her face when I said those rites. He said, I'm an old man, and I've given the last rites, I bet, to thousands of people. I have never seen anybody look that peaceful at the time of death as your mom. And that was on Friday evening. So all day Saturday, I'd go by the room, I'd go in the room and touch her, and she's still warm, still same smile on her face. Sunday morning, I go off to church with my wife, and I'm coming back. Go by the room, kind of glance out of there. She's still in the same position. Go by the room, get about 20 feet down the hallway, and I hear this voice say, Johnny? I turn around and go in, and she's sitting up with this big smile on her face. And she says, John, I saw heaven, and is it beautiful? She said, you wouldn't believe the flowers and everything else. And she was yawning as she's telling me all this. And so she just looked like she wanted to go back to sleep. So I let her go back to sleep. But an hour later, she gets up and has breakfast and could only remember part of heaven. She couldn't remember all the details that she could when she first woke up. But and eventually did die within a few weeks, very peacefully. But it was like, there was a terrible time on Friday morning, and then her resurrection on Sunday morning. It was just that's an amazing thing. And I'm taking, and remember, I'm the somewhat agnostic that's starting to take all this in. So, if the next step that happened was a buddy of mine says, we've got this professor from UCLA who's willing to come down once a week, and he gives a course at UCLA. Now, we're 2 hours away by car. He gives a course once a week at UCLA called The Bible as English Literature. His name is Dr. Bill Creasy, and he gives a 5-year Bible study course, or is going to give one here in San Diego. You have to go every week for a couple of hours, and then you take breaks just like they do at UCLA. You don't go during the summer. And I didn't particularly want to go, but my wife really wanted to go. And so I ended up saying I would go, but I went to about at least half of them because I was lecturing so much in my field and teaching, and I had developed these bone grafting techniques that I had to talk on at various places. And so, but I'm sure that made a difference in my life, learning the Gospels and knowing more about Scripture. And it started softening up my exterior. And I'm taking in all this stuff, but I'm still not, still not a Catholic. I would say I was definitely not. I did go, for my wife's sake, I would go to church. But during my New Age days, I would go to church with her at 8:00 Mass, and then I would go to the New Age church at 11:00 because they had music and they had all this fun stuff. So I was getting closer with the Bible study. And then somebody says, you got to go on a Cursillo weekend. Are you familiar with that, Keith? A Cursillo weekend?
Yeah.
For those that don't know about it, it's a 3-day retreat. And in San Diego, we held it in the mountains, or it was held in the mountains. You go up there all by yourself. I mean, by that, you have a friend, guy that takes you up there and just stays up there during the 3 days. But it's a well planned out retreat for men. And if you're married, then the wives will go the next week. But I was still not really wasn't into prayer or anything like that. I really didn't have true religion at that point in time whatsoever. So when I went on that retreat, I was still filled with some of the anxiety related to all the things going on at the office. And in some ways, it was very unsettled. But it was amazing to me that there were 40 men who were running that weekend that devoted all their time with no remuneration. And I found out that every Friday night for the previous 3 months, they would go and learn about what they had to do to make our weekend wonderful. And I thought, isn't this great that these guys did all this for us? And I would see people get up there, give talks, who were well-known people in San Diego, well-known attorneys, a couple of CEOs. And I remember one guy who was a CEO. He had a really big company. And he got up there and he said, I went through a terrible time. He says, I was addicted to drugs. And he said, I hit bottom. He said, I remember being in the shower thinking that this was the last day that I was going to live, that I was going to commit suicide. He said, somehow I found God. It actually was through a Cursillo weekend. That's why he was now dedicating time. He said, I found Jesus. He said, my life turned around. I gave up the drugs, got clean. I built up the business and everything's been wonderful. And I will, do this as much as I can to help other people learn the same thing. And I thought, isn't that wonderful? Well, that was a big step in my whole spirituality, because very shortly thereafter, a couple of things happened. One of my really good friends developed in his 40s or 50s a non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is a blood cancer. And he was told that he wasn't going to live very long. And that upset me. And then my son calls with some bad news. Not that anybody was sick, but I really wanted a grandchild. And I had 3 sons, only one was married. And it looked like that was that's where I could have some grandkids. And then his wife got pregnant and then told everybody, I'm going to have a baby in so many months, had the date, and everything was all exciting. And then she miscarried and was devastated.
Yeah.
She's the type of person that she was always successful at everything she did, but she couldn't control this loss of the baby.
Yeah.
So many months later, she gets pregnant again, and she comes over with Mark, our son, and says, don't tell anybody I'm pregnant, but I am pregnant. I'm only telling my mom and you people. And I just can't stand if everybody knows and I have to go through this again. Sure enough, she miscarries again. So right after the Cursillo weekend, I can remember sitting at my desk and the phone rings, and it's my son, Mark, and he said, Dad, I've got some bad news. I just came back with Martha from the OBGYN doctor, and we were told that we most likely can never have a child of our own. And so it seemed pretty definite.
Yeah.
And he was very sad. And I thought, well, maybe there is a way, but I had no idea what that was. But then another crazy thing happened. A friend of mine called, who I'd met on the Cursillo weekend, and we had lunch, about once a month. He lived 20 miles away. And I said, John, any chance you can have lunch with me in the next couple of weeks? He said, oh, yeah, Judy's over walking across Spain by herself. So I have all the time in the world. I said, she's doing what? He said, she's walking across Spain. I said, why in the world would she walk across Spain? He said, oh, in that Camino de Santiago thing. So this was in the end of the year 2000. And so by then the internet, it was up and Amazon was there. So I went on Amazon, I bought 5 books on this place called the Camino de Santiago, and I learned all about it. And so almost the very next Monday, I go to breakfast with a Cursillo group. And one of the guys in the Cursillo, these are guys who went on the Cursillo weekend, who now are meeting for lunch or breakfast once a week. And that's part of the deal. You go on a 3-day retreat, and then hopefully you make a commitment to meet with guys who are spiritually involved. And so even though I wasn't that spiritually involved, the weekend did move me along the pathway. And I started having a personal relationship with Christ. And sitting there at breakfast, that first Friday in the month of January of 2001, I got this inspiration from the Holy Spirit to ask Mike, the guy with lymphoma, if he would go on the Camino de Santiago with me, because I had read in one of the books that there is a saint, and Queen Isabella of Spain. Now remember, Queen Isabella and Ferdinand helped pay for Columbus to come over in 1492. Well, evidently, Queen Isabella had a girl in the year 1470, and then never could have another child. And she heard about the saint on the Camino. His name is Juan de Ortega, and that she went and prayed in the year 1475-ish or 6, and ended up getting pregnant and having a son. And was so dedicated to him, she named the son after the saint. You can look this up. She had her first son's first name was Juan. She went back and prayed again after having the baby, and wanted another baby, and she got pregnant again and had a daughter and named the daughter Juana. Not too many books will tell you that about the history, but if you look up the children of Isabella of Spain, Queen Isabella, you'll find out her first son was Juan, and the daughter born 1 year later was Juana. So I wanted to go on the Camino, but I was in full-time practice, and I couldn't take a month and a half off like you had to do the whole thing. So I had just found out that you could bicycle it in 10 days and still get the same credentials as if you walk the whole thing. So out of the clear blue, I said to this guy, Mike, who had the cancer, hey, Mike, do you want to do the Camino with me? He had just gone through chemo. He had no hair, and big husky guy, well, not that old. And he said, you're crazy. He said, I'm so weak, I can't even walk out to the mailbox. And you want me to walk across Spain? I said, no, I don't. I want you to bicycle across Spain. Well, 2 more guys said, right there, one of them was right there. He said he would do it. And so that very next week, we started just going, for a few minutes on flat ground, but we kept building. And we did this from January of 2001 all the way to May. And Mike got stronger and stronger and stronger. And I ended up going on the Camino, and I had the most amazing experience of my life. Do you want me to talk about it now?
Yeah, I do.
We come to this little town of San Juan de Ortega. I'm starving because we had just ridden 20, 30 miles, hadn't had a thing to eat. And so I'm having lunch along with Mike and the rest of the big, large group. And Mike disappears, and he comes back and he says, I have cancer. I said, of course I know it. He said, well, I was at Lourdes, France, praying. And he said, that's a holy place. He said, but I have never felt the presence of God and the Holy Spirit as much as I did in the tomb of San Juan de Ortega, which is right there. He said, drop your sandwich. He said, once the whole group goes down there, it'll be a different place. Go down in the dark right now. So I did. And I go down these steps, and there's these votive candles. And I had had a bike accident that morning, and I had a bloody knee. but I just knelt on my knees because I just had to. I can't even explain why. And I stare at this cross on the wall, and maybe 20 feet away, but down below, I'm on an upper landing in this tomb, is a casket. And it's the casket of the body of the saint. And I had said to the Lord at the beginning of this trip, "Dear Lord," I said, I really want a grandchild. And I said, and I will make a commitment to you that I will ride this whole trip, no matter what happens to me. I will give up everything, to be able to have a grandchild. And so I had made this commitment. A lot of people were cheating because we had a support van. If you got tired, you could get in the support van, but I wouldn't do it because I had made a deal with the Lord, and I wasn't going to renege in any way whatsoever. So I'm saying that again, the three prayers that I knew, the Our Father, Hail Mary, and the Act of Contrition, and I see a blazing cross superimposed on the giant cross. And what the cross that I see is like 3 feet tall, 2 feet wide. I'm a scientist. I've got 25 papers in the scientific literature. I can't believe my eyes. I said, these Spaniards are unbelievable. I walked through the door and I set off a light beam, and they've got a light show, and they're projecting a cross on the wall right in front of me. And not only did that cross stay there, but it divided. In fact, it showed up and then it divided. So I'm now looking at 3 crosses because the original cross stayed there. The ones on the outer side divide. I'm looking at 5 crosses, and then they divide. And I'm thinking, this is unreal. So I immediately think they're projecting it. So I look behind me to see the opening in the wall, because 20 years ago, we didn't have a digital screen. And there was no hole in the wall. It was a solid wall. So I thought, well, this light is these votive candles beneath me are reflecting off of my glasses. Somehow or another, it's turned into a cross, and then 7 crosses. I didn't know if 7 is a holy number at that point in time. And I go to take my glasses off, but back in those days, I only wore them for reading, so they were in my back pocket. I had no answer. Why? I'm wide awake, no alcohol, no sunstroke, clear as could be, just like I am right now. And I'm looking at 7 blazing crosses, no sound, no smell, no smoke or anything. I go into this trance. I mean, I can't. It's hard for me to tell you this right now, and you have a bunch of listeners. If something like this could happen, how could it happen? But it did, and I knew it was the Holy Spirit. I mean, I was gifted for whatever reason. I mean, I had no reason at all for that to happen to me, and for at least 15 minutes, I go into a trance, and all I can say is I felt this unbelievable sense of certitude. Martha was going to have a baby. I felt God was there in that room. The Holy Spirit was there. And I felt the commitment. And then all of a sudden, after 15 minutes of being in kind of a trance-like state, thought goes into my mind. I've been here a long time. What if they leave without me? We've got another 20 miles to do on the bikes that day. The moment I had that thought, if I had fabricated this, those crosses would have disappeared. They didn't. I mean, they didn't all just disappear. They went out the exact same way they came in. It was to a beat. It was 7 crosses, 5 crosses, 3, 2, 1, out. Now I'm, wide awake, and I walk down there, and there's the whole group. They're all done with their lunch, and they all want to come see the church. So I had eaten half my sandwich, so I didn't really have to eat the rest of it. I go back with the group. The lights are on. There's noise. It was a totally different experience. But I was granted a gift that if you said to me, you've lived a long time, what was the most dramatic day of your entire life? It was that day in that tomb of San Juan de Ortega. And all of a sudden, I knew God was real from that moment on. Now, you have to realize the last time I had been to confession was when my mom made me when I was a senior in high school. So, I mean, basically close to 40 years had passed by. I had never been to confession. And that was the year 2001. What else happened in the year 2001? Remember September 11th? How could you forget that? I saw all those people. I mean, I actually saw. I mean, I saw the buildings come down on television, and I said, any of us can die at any point in time. And I've got to get to confession. By this time, I was on the board of trustees of the American Academy of Periodontology. I was in Chicago every couple of months, paid for by them. And the hotel we stayed at, the Ritz-Carlton, was only 2 blocks from the big cathedral. And I think it's Holy Name Cathedral in Chicago. So I went to confession there. I mean, they had like 14 priests hearing confession. They didn't know who I was. So he said, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. It's been 40 years since my last confession." He said, "What? What'd you say?" 40 years. And I'm doing this face to face. I figure I'd never see him again. Anyway, that was a big step, coming to the faith. And before I quit talking, let you get involved. I'll tell you one more story. The next year, not the next year, but 7 years go by. I'm gone now. I'm going to confession, and I'm still learning the faith now. I don't know if you ever learn at all. So, I get a terrible diagnosis of prostate cancer. Now, nobody wants to hear that, especially when you're feeling good. I'd gone in for a biopsy, but doctor had said, it's probably just inflammation. I said, "Dr. Sottosanti, I'm sorry to be able to tell you this, but your biopsy came back positive. You have prostate cancer, and the biopsy report says it's a very aggressive prostate cancer." I thought I had my act together because I lost it when I got that Dear John letter. Well, I tell you, I lost it again. I mean, fortunately, I got the phone call in the afternoon. I do surgery in the morning. I got it in the afternoon where I just did quick exams. I had nothing pressure on me. I went home, and I obviously told my wife, but I'm trying to go to sleep early in bed, and there's I'm tossing and turning. I pick up the phone. I called my partner and said, "John, I can't come in the morning. I'm just devastated." I said, "You've got to cancel my patients. And, if you can get somebody else to take my place, I'm not sure when I can come back in." And right around then, a friend of mine who was really a good Catholic, she was going to Eucharistic adoration every day, calls me and said, "John, I heard you've got prostate cancer," because I sent out a letter telling my referral sources I was taking leave of absence. And she said, I pray to God every day. And she said, "I'd heard about you having this cancer yesterday. And today, when I was at Eucharistic adoration, I got this message that you're supposed to go to a service for Padre Pio at the Italian church in Little Italy in San Diego." So I go to it, and that caused me to buy every book I could find on Padre Pio. And then all of a sudden, I get this idea to fly to Lourdes, France. And I go into the healing baths of Lourdes. And I had, for nothing else, I come out of those baths, and all the anxiety and the emotions were gone. I can't say I had a complete healing from that itself, because I did go through some treatment, but here I am 17 years later, had no side effects from treatment. Everything's been great. Anyway, Keith, I've been talking so long. Why don't you take over? Please.
I have never, John, in the years of doing this podcast, it's almost 7 years now, thanks be to God, of doing this podcast, had a guest who's had demonic cars, near-death visions of heaven. What else have we had here?
I even have more. Go ahead.
multiple healings of family members and mystic experiences. Your story is remarkable, and I know that you are just scratching the surface of what's in your story in your book, because you gloss over the Lord's part. There's even more to that in the story. There's aspects of here that you're fast forwarding through that I know there's more to it, John. And I could ask you to go into detail. We'd be here for 4 hours, I think. So I won't do that just yet. But this is a absolutely remarkable story of the absolute, I think, relentlessness of God pursuing, right, you in that journey, and so many things along the way that are like, hey John, I'm over here, I'm over here. I mean, is that the sense that you get looking back, that there's just, I mean, you could take, maybe I'll put it this way, John, a sane man would take any of these instances by themselves and convert on the spot. But God was giving you so many of these graces. I'm not saying you're insane, John. I'm just saying, do you look back now and go, like, there's so many things along the way?
It's so true. I mean, I couldn't tell you much about it, but isn't there a poem called The Hound of Heaven, or it has to do with the Hound of Heaven?
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
God just just decided to whatever and throw all these things at me. I mean, I didn't go into, I mean, you say there's so many things. The time I got locked into the basement when the house was on fire and I'm down in the basement, the only door I could get out is the back door. And so I said, oh, no big, I hadn't had a breath for over a minute. So it's like, I can make it to the back door and get out of this house. I go to the back door, forgot that it snowed last night. And we had one of these storm doors, you know, those things you have to push up. I couldn't believe it. I go to push it up thinking I just flick it up and I can't hardly breathe. I go there and it's locked with a foot of snow and ice on top of it. And I'm on my last breath and I push and I hear a crack and I was able to push it open. I mean, you would think then that with that gift of being able to escape a fire in the basement. I mean, there was another fire later on in Rio de Janeiro that I was trapped on the 9th floor that I escaped. I mean, these things kept going on and on. I think I ought to talk about the Shroud of Turin because that's relatively recent. But, you know, it's funny because we got involved with this group, with the Bible study group, and a couple of them said, ever hear about the Shroud of Turin? I said, no. I said, you ought to come up with us. We ought to get a group together and we drive up to Orange County, which is about an hour away. And they have a display, they have a copy displayed, and they have all these, they have the nails, the reproductions of the nails that went into Christ's wrist and the whip, and you learn all these things. So I went up and that's how I was able to engage Francis Crick, the DNA discoverer, because they had just come back from learning a little bit about the Shroud of Turin, but certainly not enough. But I learned enough. Remember, I'm still an agnostic at this point in time. I learned enough that a brochure comes by my desk to go to a surgical meeting in Switzerland using the dental implants that I like to place. And they had all the big names around the world teaching it course. And at the same time, my wife leaves a paper just accidentally right there, a Catholic newspaper, and I open it up and it said, the Shroud of Turin will be exposed in Turin, Italy during the months of August, September, and October, year 2000. And I'm thinking, oh, okay. I get a tax write-off. I go over to the meeting, I write it off my income taxes, and I take a train ride over to see the Shroud. Sounds good. Yeah. So I go ahead, I get my ticket on the internet, go over there at the time. There's this massive crowded people. We were in line for a couple of hours. And then they say, now be respectful when you go by the Shroud. You are going to get 4 minutes with the Holy Shroud of Turin. I think, you know, I went through all this money and expense. Granted, I got the implant meeting out of it, but I get 4 minutes. So I'm going by the Shroud on my right, trying to look at it, you know, and take it all in. And then you get to the center aisle coming in. It was up by the altar. They had a big drapery that came down, and the Shroud was there. And take a left-hand turn and go out the center aisle, we were told. So I get there and I take the left-hand turn, and right there in the second row, a man on the aisle, a man gets up and leaves. I'm thinking, well, these must be special people. They have seats right up front. I figure, what do I have to? I learned this from my father. Take advantage of what you can. I sat down in the seat. I said, the worst thing that can happen is they tap me on the shoulder and say, get out of that seat. That's not your seat. Nobody said a word. I could have stayed there all day. If I couldn't, because I had a train ticket to go back, but I spent somewhere between half hour and an hour there looking at the shroud, and I became emotionally involved. When I looked at, here I am, a surgeon. I'm looking at the body and face of Christ. The face is all bruised, but the blood all over the body from somewhere around 400, 500 wounds from the lashing, and the blood on the wrist and the feet. Tears start coming down my eyes. That was a huge thing that actually happened before the Camino. So I can't say it was the holiest moment of my life, but that's why today, 25 years later, the shroud means so much to me. And I don't get, I go around lecturing. I'm not doing any of this for money. If I were to ever make any money off my book, it would go to Catholic charities. There's no doubt about it. There's no reason. So anything that I do in terms of promoting God is because of what God did for me. If God could take me, I had stomach cramps. I had neck strain. I was in the emergency room twice with stress-related illnesses. I could do nothing. If God could pull me out of that and make me, bring me to where I am today, there's no holes barred. I'll do anything to give it back. I'll leave it at that.
That's remarkable. Tell us a bit about and this is late breaking, because this is now in recent times, John, but your work now on the Shroud of Turin and some of the things that have got you back into that field in a pretty serious way recently.
Well, because of me being so open to wanting to learn more about the Shroud of Turin, I've been reading about it throughout the 20 years as articles would come across. So I've been staying up with it quite a bit. And I was asked to be one of 4 lecturers for the Diocese of San Diego on the Shroud of Turin. So I wanted to know more and more about it. And I saw there was an international shroud meeting in St. Louis. So I went to that in July. And so I already mentioned that, but that was a big thing. But I ran, God is up there making things happen. That's the only way I can explain it. Holy Spirit, thank you. He introduces me to Joe Marino. Joe Marino is the one, along with his wife, Sue, who realized when they did the carbon dating testing that they tested a patch.
Yeah. So
he is a really big name in the shroud arena. And he says to me, he said, yeah. I said, Joe, my area is the oral cavity. I said, I've been looking at it and I think maybe I could see some teeth in there. He said, yeah, other people have said that, but no one's really defined it really well. He said, why don't you get yourself a copy of a high resolution photograph? And he told me how to do that. Get it and then really study it. And if you I added high resolution photograph. If you come up with something, I think we probably ought to redo this section. You think?
Just start from the high resolution photograph part.
Okay.
Thank you, Siri, for your involvement.
Well, hopefully let me turn it off. So there's no chance of it.
That's classic.
God put that there for a reason, Keith. I know he did. Okay, turn it off. Okay. Okay. Get yourself a high resolution photograph. And then if you see anything about teeth in there, he said, write a paper on it and I'll help you get it published. And then once it's published, we can cite it on shroud.com. And so that's what happened. I started studying it and I looked. And you don't see this in just the copies you see on the internet. You go to the right place, you will. But I could see the lower front teeth and not the bottom parts as they go into the gum, but I could see the tops of them, and I could see what's called the incisal plane. Incisal plane is the imaginary line connecting the biting surfaces of all the lower all the anterior teeth. So that would be top and bottom. So the question comes up with, if you can see the lower teeth, why don't you see the upper teeth? Well, first of all, we don't know what caused this image to be on the Shroud of Turin. There is a belief system that there was some kind of light energy, a tremendous amount of light energy that came from the body at the time of a resurrection that went through and could capture teeth and even bones in the hand. And so, but we don't know what kind of energy. If it was X radiation, it was certainly a weaker type of X radiation. So Christ had a very thick mustache. You could see that in the image of the face of the shroud. And it's very, very possible that the teeth are hidden behind the upper lip and then a very thick mustache that somehow or another prevented those teeth from being imprinted. So I wrote a paper on it, and it was picked up by The Blaze, who published a opinion article that I wrote. Once it was in The Blaze, it was picked up by Newsmax. They wrote up the Blaze article and put all extra comments in it. So you could put Sottosanti The Blaze, you can put Sottosanti Newsmax. Then Newsmax called me back and said, would you like to be on our news shows? So I've been on 2 national televised news shows on the teeth on the shroud. And it's such an important thing, because if teeth are on the Shroud of Turin, and it was a you blacked out. That's why I stopped talking. Do you want me to? You lost me. Okay, I don't know why. Nobody's
back. I know
okay.
why. This is the demon card, John.
Oh, that's Satan. You try to become holy, and Satan comes after you. Okay. What's the last thing you remember that I was saying that I could possibly get back to?
Let me see here, because you're still behind on my screen. Let me just try something here. 1 second here. I'm just going to. Okay. Let's see. Okay. So you said you were just saying the importance of why it's important that oh, I lost you again. Oh, I hear you.
Okay, I see you.
Oh, okay, you're back now. Okay.
Yeah. Now, are you aware of what could have caused that? Everything
else.
No,
that's very strange.
Yeah, it is, and there's nothing going on in my house that I'm aware of.
Neither here either. So
yeah.
Okay. Well, you were saying the importance of seeing teeth in the shroud. You said the importance of the teeth on the shroud, and then you paused.
I can do that.
Okay.
Okay. The importance of the teeth on the shroud is that there had to be that energy coming through from within the body, and that means that it wasn't forged in the 1260 to 1390 period that the carbon dating testing people try to say was the time that it was forged, and it wasn't truly the burial cloth of Christ. It is proof of the resurrection. If the resurrection is true, and nobody could disprove it, then everything Christ said, how we should live our lives, be holy, go to heaven, have eternal life, stay away from hell, It's all true. What that would mean to at least half of the people in the Western world anyway, they don't want to change all their fun that they're having. They want to be rulers of their future themselves. Turn your life over to God and Christ, the Holy Spirit. That's where it is. That's where happiness lies. That's my answer. And that's why I'll do whatever I can to prove that the shroud is real.
That's fascinating, John. And I love that. And I have for a long time had an interest in things weird and wacky, like the Shroud of Turin, like relics, like these things that are, in one sense, uniquely, well, of course, like uniquely proving God, right? So I think Father Robert Spitzer, of course. I had him in the show a little while back, and one of the things that he said was, because I asked him about things like the shroud, and he goes, I think that for the age we're in now, this age where science, where it's kind of choose your own adventure, kind of relativistic kind of spirituality, and then science kind of rules the day. Right, the science is the one thing that is true. We can count on. Our faith can be whatever we want to, but science is this thing. Well, he said, right, and I think you know this too, that the number of scientists who are becoming believers now is at an all-time high, and that things like the Shroud of Turin, right, or miracles, right, visions of heaven, after-death miracles, right, near-death experiences, these kind of things are things that scientists, in air quotes, right, can't prove from science. So they point to a bigger thing, and that he said those kind of miracles, things like the Shroud of Turin, are the modern miracle for the modern age that are really going to just continue to test and to stretch like the belief systems of those agnostics like you were, who can't explain these kind of things from science. Right? This is the new frontier. Things like the shroud of like apologetics, of explaining the faith, right, through science, right?
Absolutely. I do these monthly programs for a Catholic radio station in San Diego. And this past month, what I did was the 9 indisputable facts of why the Shroud of Turin is the authentic burial cloth of Jesus Christ. And, those people that say it isn't, they basically, I hate to say this, but they're liars. I mean, the shroud is 2 microns thick, and they'll say, "Oh, it was painted," or they rubbed it over a bas-relief statue, and they put pigments in it. That was proven there's no pigment and there's no paint. The only thing that they can come up with today that could possibly form the image is laser radiation.
Yeah.
And 1260 to 1390, they're going to use a laser.
Yeah, they had lasers. Of course.
Yeah, right. Yes. So anyway, Father Spitzer's right. Things are going crazy. Artificial intelligence. Can you imagine what it's going to be like? These robots walking around, and what things are going to be so unbelievably bad that God is up there and he's making things be revealed. France had more conversions to Catholicism this year than how many years in a row? One of my church, I go to 2 Catholic churches because I love them both. I love both pastors. I kind of alternate a little bit, but anyway, one of them, we have like almost 30 people converting this year. That's unreal. It used to be 8 to 10. That's 3 times.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. And it's science. It's the shroud. It's scientific discoveries. It's Father Spitzer will tell you about near-death experiences. In a sense, my mother had a near-death experience 30 years ago.
Yes. It's amazing stuff. It's amazing stuff, John. I don't know. I think we'll stop here, but we could go forever on this topic and on your journey. There's so much in here. I guess my parting question for you, for that person who is listening, who might say, "Man, Dr. John, your story sounds like mine, right? I've been there. And there are so many people who kind of were like you, who were raised kind of Catholic, who were introduced to the faith, who were catechized. And on one hand, there is this there are a bunch of people, and I was in this camp for a long time before my own conversion journey. I was an evangelical Christian for a long, long time, and we looked at Catholics like you, John, and said, well, look, he was catechized. He went to Catholic school. He went to catechesis class, and then he turned away from the faith and is doing these things. Like, so obviously the Catholic Church, it can't be true because there are Catholics out there who were raised Catholic and aren't practicing. Right. So on one hand, there's that. There's people who will see people like, your story. You would have been at one point in your story, John, and say, here's proof against the Catholic Church. Right. But there are people also listening who like you live that story. They were raised Catholic. They were catechized. They, for whatever reason, kind of like you, just kind of went along and were nominally Catholic, were agnostic. They're maybe waiting for that experience that you had that brought you deeper into the faith. So I think my question is, for those two people, the person who's looking at the Catholic faith and going, no, they're all just nominal Catholics, they're cultural Catholics, they're not practicing their faith, I'm not interested. What do you say to that person, first of all? And then the person who was raised Catholic, who is kind of in your shoes, who's waiting for a reason to go deeper, what do you say to that person? And start where you want to start here. I'll give you two hard questions to answer.
If I'm going to boil it down to simply one answer, is that most of us suffer from what C.S. Lewis said is the greatest of the 7 deadly sins, and that is pride. And pride means we want to be in control. And in fact, that's what New Age religion is, are people who say, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. That means you want to be in control, don't you? And people who have an alcohol problem, a drug problem, are addicted to pornography, any of those things where you can't break free, you have to turn it over to a higher power. The AA people knew that many years ago. There's a chapter about Father Bill Wilson, who was a priest who became an alcoholic, and he found out. He almost murdered somebody before he found out he really had to give up his life truly to God, not just say it. And so wherever you are in your journey, you have to just say, God, if you're up there, just say, God, I know you're up there. I know that I've been guilty of not paying attention, to not really listening, to not being devout, but forgive me. I'm sorry. Help me. I need help, and I will do what you say. It isn't until you surrender. The magic word is surrender. Until you surrender to Christ, then you're going to be having battles your whole life trying to figure it out. And there's another book, He Leadeth Me, is the name of it. Walter Zizek, where he's in a concentration camp, basically in Russia, and he's being victimized and every day, and it's just maddening, suffering. One day, and they were going to shoot him, and he said, Lord, that was the day he gave up control. Lord, I give up control to you. If you want me to suffer, if you want me dead, that's okay with me. You're God, you're my ruler. I don't understand all the things that have happened to me. And once you make that decision and truly mean it, then your life can be a series of high points and low points. But if you really want peace, now we're all going to go through difficult times. Like my cancer, I thought I had found peace until I got not terminal cancer, but aggressive cancer. But turning it over to God is really the answer.
Good answer. Very good answer, sir. John, an absolute pleasure to speak with you. This has been an amazing story, completely off the rails. I love it. The book is Mortal Adhesions. Say that 10 times fast. Tell us a bit about where people can find this, can get this, can maybe find more of your stuff, can follow you. I'll put these links in the show notes for YouTube and the podcast. Where do you want to point them towards, John?
Well, if you want to go directly to purchase the book. Amazon is the easiest. There's no doubt about it. So Mortal Adhesions, or the last name Sottosanti, you'll be able to get the book right away. If you want to know a little bit more, you want to see some of the photos. In fact, I have photos of the casket of San Juan de Ortega, of the cross on the wall that I was praying to, where I saw the 7 blazing crosses. There are pictures on my website, mortaladhesions.com. If you want to know more about me and the shroud, just Google Shroud Sottosanti, and you will see many, many articles.
That's fantastic stuff. And I'll put those links in the show notes. John, I'll say it again, an absolute pleasure having you on the show. I'm grateful the Holy Spirit brought you and Dr. Lavoie together and pointed you in this direction. We have benefited deeply from this conversation, and listeners will love this, I'm absolutely sure. So thank you. I want to say God bless you, the work you are doing for the church. It's fantastic stuff. And thank you so much for being here today. It's been awesome.
Keith, I want to thank you for what you're doing. I've seen some of your programs. Keep it up. You really are doing a great job spreading the word.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.